Welcome to LHC Unplugged, where you'll hear unscripted conversations about life, faith, the Bible, and today's world with the pastors from LongHillChapel here in Chatham, New Jersey. Ready to grow in your spiritual journey? Let's dive in.
Welcome to LHC Unplugged. I'm Sarah Harrington. I'm the Director of Communications here at LongHillChapel, and I have our lead pastor, Michael Hattie, and our Associate Pastor, Joey Monteleone. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
You guys ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
I love this podcast. I love doing this podcast with you guys. One of the things Pastor Michael says all the time is that he loves the audio levels of this podcast, which if you're listening in your headphones,
this is a good sounding podcast.
It's a good sounding podcast. And
even if you don't get anything else out of it, enjoy the audio quality for what it is.
Absolutely. We work really hard at that. And it's particularly good in the car. Now, what I noticed is I just listen to podcasts in the car, but Pastor Michael, you said the other day that it doesn't bother your GPS instructions. Now, I had to do some mental work with that because I'm just thinking, well, why would it bother your GPS? And I realized there's a difference between you and I, and maybe me and the rest of the world, which I'd love some comments on this in the chat, fam. But I don't have my GPS talking to me, but you do.
Yes, I think it's odd that you don't, because what's the point?
I kind of
are you looking at your phone as you're driving? Because
apparently
you should be paying attention to the road.
I should have more focus on the road. My phone is not like I don't have to look down. I have to look slightly to the right but not at the road. But not at the road. Yes. So full confession, I'm not looking momentarily.
I have reasons I don't look at the road too. Just so we're coming clean here. It's a safe place.
It's the same not looking at the road when you look in your rear view. You kind of look up and then you look back.
This is true.
I kind of look down and then I look back. It's not like I'm staring at it. Plus,
so do you feel like I'm judging you?
No.
Okay.
No. Not judging. Lovingly bringing me to the light. But I've never thought, oh, my GPS should talk to me because I'm listening to content.
What is content?
Podcasts, theories about Marvel movies that don't matter.
Do you use that word with like your kids?
Content?
Talk about content?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Okay. You're such
what content are you consuming?
You're such a marketing guy with that.
But what when you have your kids in the car?
Oh, that's when it's story time or it's their playlist. Now, here's a conversation we should have. Do your children have playlists?
No.
Okay. Mine do because they have very specific, and this is the worship leaders' kids, right? They have very specific songs that they want to listen to. So sometimes it's the oldest, sometimes it's the middle, sometimes it's the youngest. And we've made playlists on Spotify that are just theirs. Because what I realized is this is the 2026 version of a mixtape.
This is true.
Yeah.
It's their songs that they want to listen to. Now, there's a lot of overlap because they all live in the same house. But they have their own playlists. And I just think when they ask, can I put on my playlist? I never got to do that. You got in the car and whatever mom and dad put on, that's what you listened to. Now they've got their playlists.
Wait, are they quiet in the car listening to
no,
music?
they chatter all the time. They talk with each other. So they're not actively listening.
Well, you have several of them too.
There's a couple, yeah.
Yeah, a few.
Yeah. It's a very quiet car ride.
So now you have the GPS, Pastor Michael, on and actually talking to you, correct? Because I do. So this is throwing me a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, does yours – see, now I have mine set to the British person because I feel like it sounds very fancy.
Okay.
You want to turn left in a fancy way? Is that what you're saying? I'm turning left, which you can't really do in New Jersey very often.
Anything that it says that is strictly British that does not translate to the New Jersey road rage that we have?
Yes.
Okay, such as?
So, like, they'll say pull into the car park instead of the parking lot. And I'm just like, wow, that sounds really fancy. And then I have to explain to my children that it's a parking lot.
Okay.
Because we live in New Jersey.
Okay, so here, I'll push back slightly on both of you. The suggestion was that I'm not paying attention to the road. Are you not paying attention to the road where you need someone to tell you what to do? Because for me, I'm paying attention to the directions enough to where I can look at them and then look back at the road. Are you guys just absentmindedly hoping someone tells you what to do next?
Yeah, what happens? Let's be gracious. I have a very short attention span.
Fair enough.
And so if there's not the voice kind of pulling me back, I'll be thinking about something very random that has nothing to do with roads or driving or really any kind of thing that most people would think about, like World War II history, like the minutia of that.
Yeah.
I'm usually thinking about something like that, and I'm like, oh, I should have turned at that exit back there. And like when it's on the Garden State Parkway or one of our highways here, that means you get to pay the price for going another 10 miles to turn around. So that's why it's on all the time.
Got it.
and I have to have it because sometimes you'll mute it or you won't put it on, and I'll keep driving.
So over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about some of the misinterpreted Bible verses. And this is something kind of like our GPS leads us in different directions. We were thinking this was going to be a one-episode podcast, and it's been great. We've really dug deep, so go back and listen to those. But the one we're going to focus on today to start is 1 Corinthians 10:13. And that's, no temptation has overtaken you except for what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it.
So this verse has been taken in a very interesting direction. You just read it for exactly what it is. The way this kind of gets communicated and translated is that God won't give you more than you can handle. Now, exactly what you read is the problem. That's not what it says. And not only is that not what it says, when we use it that way, we actually miss the real promise that's underneath it. And quite frankly, the real promise is way better than what we're even trying to communicate. So let me read it one more time. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. So the key word here, again, that I only caught when we started looking at this, the key word is temptation, not suffering. This verse is not about sickness. This verse is not about grief. This is not about anxiety. This is not about your life falling apart. This verse is about the moment that you are pulled towards sin and you feel like you're the only one fighting that battle. And so again, we talked about this in episode 1 of this series, that context really matters about this. Who is Paul talking to? Well, he's talking to the Corinthians, and he's talking about a bunch of things. He's talking about Israel wandering in the wilderness. He's talking about idolatry. He's talking about craving evil things, sexual sin, and testing God. And so what Paul is basically saying here is that there's a pressure to compromise in a culture that normalizes it. There's a ton of things that are going to pull you in a direction away from God, away from his word, away from his people, away from the call that he has on your life. And the culture is not going to support that. And so this isn't really a therapy verse that, God's just got it and, you're not going to be given too much. This is kind of about spiritual warfare, about when you feel pulled towards sin, you're not going to not be given a way out. And the problem with this verse in particular is, though, if we misinterpret it as though God won't give us more than we can handle, it actually kind of makes it look like God's going easy on us. Like we can't handle it because God's not going to give us more than we can handle because he doesn't want us to be overwhelmed. So that makes us look weird. But it also makes God look weird because now it's like, well, do you need to put kid gloves on me because I can't handle things? Of course, that's not what we'd say. But a lot like the GPS, it's kind of where the thought will lead when you start taking it out of context. What I like to say with this verse, particularly with this idea of God giving you more than you can handle when it comes to temptation, yeah, God does give you more than you can handle, but he never gives you more than he can handle. And so the point in the promise is to come back to a God who faithfully will give you a way out of that temptation. It's not that we have to succumb to it, and that's kind of what Paul is saying. Like, no, there is a way out. You need to use it. But if you're just looking at it like, well, God's not going to give you anything you can't deal with, well, it kind of paints God in a weird light. It paints us in a weird light, and the theology is just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and there's the temptation side of this, but then there's the, is God giving us more than we can handle side of it? And they're separate, but they're related to each other because there is that idea, God's not going to give you more than you can handle. And I actually, like you, I think that's absolutely not true.
Yeah.
He does give us more than we can handle because it breaks our dependence on ourselves and our belief that we're actually God.
Yes.
But I actually think that has some truth when it comes to temptation too, because I think we think about avoiding temptation or resisting temptation, or the way out is like, just our ability to gut it out and get through it on our own. And we just can't. Our nature starts at a fallen place. And so it's only through Christ, it's only through the power of the Holy Spirit that we have any hope of walking through that.
And Paul kind of echoes that when he says, there's things I want to do and I don't do it. And then there's things I don't want to do and I end up doing those things. If you look at that from a struggle standpoint, even the guy who's writing this is kind of admitting, we don't get this right all the time. I can't master this in my own abilities.
Yeah, and actually I'd say we don't get it right much of the time,
Most of the time,
because our clarity around what's true is really, it's clouded by all sorts of things. It's clouded by culture. It's clouded by our own desires. It's clouded by, just the things we're in the midst of. There are some people who go rushing headlong into temptation. That's true. There's a lot of people who get pulled into it and have a hard time navigating around it. One of the things I think that is so critical for people who follow Jesus is if you find an area where you're on the edge of it, like get away from the border. You have to move away from the border of that, because you're just not capable of riding that fine line. And honestly, if you're looking at your life and you're looking at sin versus following God, it's like the answer should never be how close can I get while it's still okay. Sometimes, I'm sure this has happened to you, Pastor Joey, people come talk to us and they're like, is it a sin if I?
Yeah.
And really without kind of realizing it, what they're saying is, how close can I get to it, before God gets ticked off at it, which has its own issues. But that's the wrong question. That's the wrong question. It's saying, how can I put guardrails in my life so I'm not even having to ask that question?
Yeah, and I think, too, Paul is very specific about sexual sin in the New Testament, that this is not something you fight. This is something you flee. This is something you run from. So just to be clear about that, I kind of like taking that approach with all of it. Like, yes, there is ability to resist sin. James tells us, resist the devil and he will flee from you. There is a bit of our spiritual lives that we need to fight and work at a little bit. But when it comes to sin, I kind of just look at it like there's a illusion that I even think I can beat this, because it's not only in the world, it's in me. There's a nature that's within me and all of humankind bent towards walking away from God. And then there's a brokenness of the world affected by sin. How successful do you think you're going to be apart from God's working in your life? And I think that's really the question that we have to come back to. This isn't about God going easy on us or giving us just a little bit so that we're victorious. No, this is about breaking our will and our pride and coming back to a loving, gracious Father who has given us his Son, who has defeated sin, and saying, actually, don't try in your own effort. Submit yourself under his work, under his finished work at the cross. And that's really what I see within this verse. It's not about my willpower. It's really about God's provision and his presence.
Well, it's also God's not saying everything's going to be unicorns and rainbows either.
I wish he did.
Sometimes we look at that and it's like, okay, well, God's not going to give me more than I can handle. But like you're saying, that's not the case.
Right.
I think there's another thing you can do in temptation is that you can look past yourself and past the situation. Like one of the best things you can do, and we're going to talk about another verse in a minute that is actually surprisingly related to this, but is when most of the sin that we accumulate, we sin against God, but it has implications in our lives. Even you were talking about sexual sin, in our bodies, but also in the lives of other people. Almost without exception, there's a ricochet or there's a ripple effect into the lives of other people. And one of the things I think is very helpful to consider doing is to figure out how your decisions impact other people for good or for ill. And, we're going to talk about the love of money in just a minute. And we tend to look at the resources that come into our lives as things that we get to do stuff with. You get a raise, you're like, I can buy more things and I can go more places and I can, add this to my house. And none of those are bad things. They're not wrong things, but it starts from a me perspective. We can look at consumption and it starts with a me perspective. We can even look at relationships, like you were saying, sexuality as what do I get? And the moment we do that, we actually start consuming the people around us. We start consuming things that were meant to bring good into the world. There's very few things that are sinful that don't have a healthy place where they came from. It's run out of its borders or its boundaries. And when you begin to think in those terms, like, okay, this thing I've chosen for myself, what are the downstream impacts? What's the ripple effect into other people's lives? And is that something I really want to be? Is that the person I really want to be? Most people have, I think, great aspirations and hopes for their lives, but there's this incongruity between what we hope or what we wish or what we want to be and what we actually choose to be in those decisions. And when you do that, when you look as a person who who follows Jesus, with the power of God in your life, that our lives are bought with a price, but they're for a much greater purpose than us just feeding our desires and feeding what we want and running off in whatever direction we want to go with. And it's just a better way to live at its very fundamental kind of bottom level. And so when you start to do that, it suddenly starts to shape things in a way that you never, I think, would have expected. You're like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to leave that legacy in someone else's life. I don't want to be a dark spot on their story. I want to be a blessing. I want to bring them closer to wholeness, to Jesus, to whatever you want to fill the blank in with. And that's actually a helpful way to look beyond the moment of struggle and to see the bigger picture.
And I think parenting does that right away. Like you said, we have to look internally, but kids give us the mirror when it comes to something like this, where you're talking about a legacy and leaving that.
Yeah, I think we could all speak to this. We are confronted every day with the story we're writing in our kids' lives. And again, I think we all start from a great place, but we discover all the places so quickly where we need the power of God to intervene, where we need to be made whole by the power of the Holy Spirit, where we need to do the hard work of walking out of maybe what we grew up with or the legacy that has been left to us, and to say, with our kids, this is where I was, but I'm going to leave you someplace better, as much as it depends on me.
And Pastor Michael, you were talking about the next verse a little bit. So this is 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs.
This is part of a passage that is, as we've talked about in previous weeks here, has a lot of context around it. But the shorthand, just like we did with the last verse, there's kind of a shorthand interpretation, or like if people were to say that, they would say, well, money is the root of all evil. And so that's how it kind of gets picked up, is that money is the root of all evil. And I think certain brands of Christianity and the church have reinforced that view that, if you've been successful in your business or successful in your job or however it's come to you, that's just a bad thing. And I don't think that's what the scriptures are saying at all. All of the good things in our lives have come from the Lord. They've come from God. He has brought them into our lives. What we do with them, just like what we were talking about, is the key. And what was going on in this letter to Timothy, who was kind of a protege of the Apostle Paul, he was like a next generation leader. He was in a church in a place called Ephesus. And one of the things that we learn reading through the New Testament, and especially these letters to these early churches, is that they all had the same issues we do. The names might have been different, the time might have been different, the culture might have been different, but humanity is very much the same. And I think it's one of the great reasons for reading things, not only from the scriptures, but just in human history, to discover that, maybe history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And with these early letters, we find that same problems, same human struggle.
Oh, we'd get a letter today.
Yeah, we would definitely all get we would get a letter. But Paul was always writing. He was writing to correct. He's writing to confront, but he's also writing to encourage and exhort and to say kind of what we just said. Look, you're going this way, but there's a better way that you've been called to as the people of God. So let's do that. Do that one instead. What was happening in this church in Ephesus when Timothy was there was that all sorts of other teachings besides the gospel, the message of Jesus and the way of Jesus, were kind of leaking their way in. And there was this fascination with genealogies and angels and kind of all this like science fiction-y kind of stuff, which is really interesting. It just seems a lot more interesting than taking up your cross daily and dying to yourself and following after Jesus. That seems kind of boring, and it seems like hard work. So it's a lot more interesting, when you can go come up with these mythologies about angels and all sorts of things. And there was this idea throughout the ancient world that there could be a more evolved version of Christianity. There was a teaching called Gnosticism, which was working its way into many of the churches. And this is kind of this whole brew of this. And then there was a bunch of people who were arguing with each other about which was the smarter, better way to follow Jesus, and which teachings were right and which ones weren't, and which ones were more enlightened and which ones weren't. And so it was this church that was just almost infected with a bunch of other influences and forces around it. And what happened was, just like has happened in our age, is there was this idea that got in that said, you know what, I can enrich myself and also follow Jesus. not that I can be, wealthy or well-to-do, but I can do it for me and kind of staple some Jesus onto it, and that's okay. And what Paul's writing here is part of a bigger section where he says this. He says, anyone who teaches false doctrines, this is verse 3 of chapter 6, and does not agree to sound instruction of our Lord Jesus Christ and the godly teaching, he is conceited and understands nothing. And then he kind of goes on and he talks about some of the things that we just talked about. And then there's this verse that challenges me every single day, verse 6, where he says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. So it's godliness, it's following the way of Jesus, and also being content with what I've been given this day, content with the station of life that I've been given. And again, not that we don't, work hard and aspire to things and, try to be faithful with our lives, but just to say, can I truly be content? Because you read a verse like this, and I think most of us in the back of our heads, there's this little voice that says, no, you won't. No, you're not going to be. You want more, and we want better, and especially in the area where we live. That's just a very prevailing thing. But then Paul reminds us, he says, we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. That's verse 7. And then he says, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. I use the phrase eat and live indoors a lot. It's like, if we can eat and live indoors, that's a good thing. But again, we all have food and we all have clothing, but we struggle with contentment. And so there's this thing that he's setting up. And after that, in verse 9, he says, people who want to get rich, and he's saying people who want to enrich themselves fall into temptation, like we just talked about, and a trap, and into many foolish, harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. And that's when he gets into verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs. And so Paul is setting up this contrast that is throughout the New Testament, that you cannot serve two masters. Jesus said that famously, and he was also talking about money. He's like, your heart cannot be devoted in two places. This would be like each of us going home to our spouse and saying, you know what, I'm bringing another spouse in, and I'm going to love you both exactly. It just doesn't work. I'm not suggesting anyone do that.
Good.
Yeah, we're not going there at all. But it's this idea that our hearts are a battleground for affection. Our affections are always going somewhere. And Jesus, and I think the Apostle Paul here is saying, you can't split that up. It's going to go one direction or another direction. There are a lot of things in our lives that are auditioning for the role of God, that are auditioning to rule us. And there's something in human nature that we would never admit to this. We're like, oh, I'm in charge of my life. I'm the captain of my own destiny. But we all find ourselves ruled by something. We choose to be ruled by something. And, maybe it's success, and maybe it's, like Paul is saying, riches, but maybe it's approval. Maybe it's safety. Maybe it's any number of other things that rule us, and we begin to build our lives around appeasing whatever that voice or whatever that God is. And Paul ends, and he says this, but you, man of God, flee from this, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's like, don't see how close you can get. Don't see how much you can keep this and add God to it. Flee from it. And when you flee from it, you have to pursue something else in its place. And he says, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness, and fight the good fight of the faith. So it's a fight. Which is
perfectly tangential to the other verse, which is, okay, if you're going to flee from it, it's because of the temptation. Like, I love how you said that your heart is a battleground. So in this battleground, there's a temptation towards consumption and approval and all of this stuff. That's the temptation. Flee from it, like he says, and go back to 1 Corinthians. When you're tempted, he'll provide the way out. And what is the way out? Read that last list again.
Flee from this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness.
Those are the things that provide the way out to the temptation of consumption, approval, all of these things. It's the fruit of God's Spirit in your life.
Yeah, that's kind of a shorthand of what it is. Yeah. And they're also, interestingly, all others focused. They're either focused towards God or towards other people or both. And that sets up that thing that sin is. Sin is actually this internal consuming desire that we have for things, for people, for approval, for things we're trying to get somewhere else or we're trying to avoid.
Sin and temptation are very rarely for the betterment of somebody else. They're always about you.
Yeah, they actually, I would say they are never.
Yeah.
We can say that they are, but they are actually never.
And the antithesis of that, as Paul is pointing out, is when you take those desires, when you take that temptation, you submit it to the feet of Jesus, and he gives you that way out. The manifestation of his spirit in your life is love, gentleness, patience, joy, self-control. Those are outward. And so when you shift from the internal focus of consumption, whatever that looks like, to the outward focus of how do I bring people to a better position? How do I leave a lasting legacy that's not about me? How do I bring, as Rick said on Sunday, how do I make the name of Jesus famous? This starts to become a habit in our lives where it's a little bit easier to bear, not because God's going easier on us, but because we're recognizing that this is actually something that we have to, this is a formation. This is something that we have to live out every day.
Yeah, and there's, with temptation, and kind of what we've talked about with both of these verses that has kind of come together, I think, in a really, really interesting, important way, is that the way out isn't just like this existential thing that leads to nowhere.
Yeah.
Whenever you kick a god off the throne of your life, a god of consumption or whatever it is, there's a vacancy. Mm-hmm. There's something that's for rent, and you have to fill that. That's why the Apostle Paul says, flee. But then you have to pursue something. You have to flee, and you're running away. But then you have to run towards something. You have to pursue it, because otherwise, it's just going to come back. Mm-hmm. It would be like us, in my house, I have some spots in the outside where there have been like gaps in some of the siding or by the roof, and we get wasps who like to move in. And there ain't nothing that Michael Hottie likes more than a good man versus nature story of chasing out the wasps. But you have to fill the space, or you're just going to get more wasps. And so you have to intentionally do both things. You have to chase out what's there, but then you have to fill in the space with something else. And if you're doing a battle against temptation, that's the reason so many people fall back into it. I don't want to simplify people's struggles because they're very complicated, but it's when we don't turn and fill that space with something better, with something that leads us towards Jesus and leads us in the way of Jesus towards other people.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to LHC Unplugged. As a reminder, we meet in person on Sunday mornings at 10:15 at LongHillChapel in Chatham, New Jersey. We also live stream our service, so you can also listen online at 10:15 on Sundays at lhcnj.net. And if you have any questions for our pastors to answer on our podcast, you can send them right to us at questions@lhcnj.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you next time.